Ladies and gentlemen, let us discuss Half-Life 2. This is the review for the game, and I am told that today, the 16th of November 2019, is the precise moment in history where this title turned 15 years old. I thought, what better way to destroy it utterly than to do so on its 15th birthday. So, yeah, this is going to be a murder. Brace yourselves, call the cops, do whatever it is you need to do to put your mind at ease, for this was even worse than the first title, which was already pretty bad. Now, naturally, the foreword of the Half-Life 1 review held a lot of disclaimers, more than I am ever known to give when starting off a review for a game that I did not have any good times with whatsoever, beyond maybe a little bit of insanity here and there, which is, of course, not intentional on the developers. I would at least hope not. Because of all the disclaimers in that review, I'm just going to not leave any for this review. I recognize that some people like this game, but it's bad. And like I said in the credits rant of, I believe, the very last segment, which was also the point where we one and done the last episode, episode 2, I got nothing to say about this title in terms of, respecting it for what it stood for, or what it accomplished, or historically, like how it ended up working. Because I actually think that everything that it ended up doing, all of the genre tropes and other such things that it established, shot the genre of FPSs in the foot. For this reason, we have all of those Halo games, I would argue. It's for this franchise's existence that we started to stray away from more open-ended level design of games like Doom and its clones, Duke Nukem 3D and its clones. These games that I have had very passing experiences with, but have mostly just relied on the word of others whom standards I trust to explain to me what was missing, comparing these old games to the Half-Life franchise. But even without comparison, and even without taking into account its historical impact or any of these other things that are very much external to the product itself, we can just look at Half-Life 2 and we can recognize that it is bad. It was not a positive experience. Now, when I'm sitting down to play a game, I don't think to myself, what would be great here? What would be great is if I could be a cameraman following a story, a movie, and just trying to get a good angle on the action and the drama and all this other stuff. I don't know what the raw figures would look like if you separated out all the time that it took me to sit through the cutscenes and you compared that time to platforming and you compared that time to the time it took me to shoot everything. I have a feeling that a lot of the game's running time actually had nothing to do with being an FPS. Maybe you could argue the vehicle sections have their place in FPS games. This game did a very poor job of trying to argue for that. But nonetheless, even if you bundle that in, there's still a pretty good amount that's just puzzle solving and platforming, and a pretty good amount that's just sitting and waiting for cutscenes to finish so that you can go back to playing the game the way that you wanted to. And notably, in my playthrough, I ran away at almost every single goddamn opportunity I was given by good old Gabe Newell. I ran far the fuck away from all of the cutscenes whenever I could. Sometimes so fast that I broke the sound barrier. And other than that, there's really not a whole lot to mention as far as the cutscenes go. You are indeed a cameraman, not a player, for most of this title. And even in many of the situations where there are sequences of events where you must complete gameplay puzzles and kill enemies and all the other stuff you would expect to do in a game, you're still doing it in such a linear slog of a way so as to take away all of your agency and so as to make sure that you recognize you are doing some sort of weird Simon Says, an elaborate QuickTime event, if you will. Now, what do I mean when I say that you're a cameraman and not a player? Well, in order to really understand that is pretty much the biggest sort of death knell that this franchise really ever uttered, was the admission that you're not really trying to play a game, you're actually trying to experience a story, and it just happens to be that you're doing so through an interactive software that's only interactive sometimes. We have to take a step back and look at this game from a little bit more of a top-down point of view. Now, this game is a tech demo. This game is a tech demo for the Source engine, and it shows a lot of what is possible, and a lot of it was perhaps new to some people, perhaps novel for such an industry at the time of the game's release back in 2004, I believe. And of course, it was running on old tech in terms of old hardware when it was created and when it was played initially. And we still ran into some performance troubles in the year 2019, which is pretty impressive. But perhaps that's due to Steam and more so, due to some other third-party shit compared to playing the game right now and blaming that. Which is probably why I should start getting cracked versions of all these games instead of playing the official ones, because I probably would have less issues like that. But DRM aside, the game is indeed a tech demo. It is a game where you are seeing the product that people wanted to push out so that people would see what is possible with the engine and say, I can take this and I can actually make something that is a game with it. I don't need to worry about this game not being a game. I can use this for my own purposes. I can use the engine that this was made in for my own purposes. I can open up these maps and see how they did it. Sort of like, the StarCraft campaigns, actually, for both the first game and the second game. You can look at that as a tech demo. This is what's possible in the engine. And of course, there's a lot more that's possible in those engines if you want to invest more time into it, just like there's a lot more possible in the Source engine than what Half-Life 2 would have you believe. That's not the limit. That's simply a primer. This is what you can do. So that's a good way to look at this game in general, as it is indeed a tech demo. But why, then, is this tech demo that revolves around showing off the physics engine and, focusing your gameplay around certain things that are very much only possible because of the engine's capabilities? And it's a little bit different than saying, like, your weapons are, different because of your engine. Of course, the RPG, the grenade launcher and stuff, or the rocket launcher, rather. And that is very much probably something that is to do with the engine. You probably, couldn't do that as easily if you were still running on Gold Source or you're still running on the Quake engine or something. Who knows what you could actually do if you put your mind to it. But, combining everything else, it makes sense that your rocket launcher is kind of a tech demo. You got your grenade physics, you got your physics for all the other objects, and you got your squad AI to some degree. More on that in a minute. So you got all these things that are a tech demo, but why, then, is this tech demo so chock full of uninteractive gameplay and cutscenes? Now, if you're still running off of the position that you are playing a tech demo and not a game, then you would just say, well, this tech demo is showing you that cutscenes are possible. But I get the feeling that somebody thought that they were making an actual story here. And the problem is I can never get immersed in a game where it's very clear that they are taking these side steps and funneling you down certain trees of decision making and pushing you down pathways where you have to interact with certain things in a certain way so that they can wow you with the wow factor of having physics in a game or whatever. That's really what I get at, is the reason why I'm not impressed is because, of course, we're years separated from the game's release. So I understand that maybe I would be a little bit more wowed by it when it was in its time. That doesn't stop me from appreciating a game that actually has good gameplay, though. Like, there's a reason why I'm still modding Brood War. It's because when I play Brood War, even unmodded Brood War, I have a great time. I have a genuinely enjoyable time playing Brood War in custom scenarios that promote Brood War's style of gameplay, and in Melee, where I'm just playing with friends or playing against AI. So there's plenty of argument to be made that it has nothing to do with how far away I am from the game's release, because that's a game that's even older than Half-Life 2, and I still enjoy it thoroughly. I enjoy it because of its gameplay, much less because of the wow factor, because I am a steeled veteran of that game, even if I'm not very good at it. And that means that it's very clear that, you could argue that maybe I'm biased for Brood War, but I've also shat on it probably way more than I'll ever shit on Half-Life 2, even though Half-Life 2 is a much worse game. And of course, yes, it's an FPS compared to an RTS, so you can't really draw direct comparisons there, but just as an example for the reviewer side of things than the actual game, just diffusing that argument. That the reason why I didn't give this game a fair shot is because I didn't experience it back in 2004. Well, I actually did experience it in 2007. My standards are obviously much lower back then. That was a whole 12 years ago. So 12, by the way. What age was I? I guess I was 13, probably. Yeah. So I was 12 or 13 when I first played it. Probably just turned 13 because it came out on the console in, I believe, around October or November or something of that year, whatever that year was, 2007, I think. So, yes, many years ago, I did actually play this game. Didn't didn't really have a great old time, but I bought into the narrative because back then it didn't take much to engage me. And I was willing to put a lot more faith in developers to tell a story. I distinctly remember actually calling up a friend of mine after I played episode 2 and said, wow, that ending was so good, which is obviously laughable now. So, a little embarrassing, but I don't have any secrets here, guys. I admit everything. So, yeah, at the end of the day, you look at this tech demo and you're wondering why there's such a narrative focus. I do think that people thought that they were telling a good story here, despite the fact that you can't get immersed in a game that is funneling you down all these decision trees and forcing you down these pathways and forcing you to interact with certain objects. And it's the express purpose of wowing you, but you're not wowed anymore. See, this is the gameplay equivalent, or the video game equivalent, I should say, of putting a meme in your movie. Like if you guys saw the Black Panther movie, there's a point where it's well past the expiration date of this particular meme. It was probably expired by the time that they were doing this shoot or writing that into the script. But they still had a character look at somebody's Crocs and say, what are those? In what is quite possibly the cringiest line in the entire film. Reminder, this is also the same film where that same character calls a white guy colonizer. So yeah, there's some problems with that. And I hope that was a crystallized enough example, because the point is, this is only worthwhile in a certain point in time. It's a snapshot of the reference of the day. And you can make something that is timeless, or as timeless as a game can be, just by making it good and fundamentally sound. And they didn't do any of that here. They opted for gimmicks, and they opted for things that were going to have an expiration date expressly because the game industry was going to progress, at least in a technical department, and now we no longer are wowed by the things we saw in Half-Life 2. So, as much as it has a place in history, we can say, for whatever the fuck that's worth, it ends up not being worth much when you consider it in the grand scheme of things. So we can dismiss that argument as well, that, again, the game is good, or was much more, like, the reason why it's good and the reason why it captured the imagination of so many people is because back in 2004 or 2007 or whenever you played it, it was, state of the art. Well, I don't think it was state of the art back then anyway, but even if I concede that point, because I'm not interested in arguing it, it doesn't matter for this particular review, because we're not treating it like a game in 2004. I didn't play it in 2004. I played it just now. I played it in 2019. So let's talk about my experience in 2019. So that forward out of the way anyway, we can continue to talk about the tech demo part. Again, this is a tech demo. Why is it focusing on story? How am I supposed to get immersed in a story where the game is sending me down these rabbit holes so that I can experience its now dated physics engine and now dated wow factor, tech, whatever you would tack on as marketing for a tech demo, its features, we'll say, with air quotes, of course. I can't get immersed in that. I can't get immersed in the fact that the AI are only a threat in very specific circumstances where you're rounding a corner with some guy with a full auto shotgun, despite the fact that you use the same shotgun. You can't use the full auto because XD. And, that's pretty much the only time they're a threat, or they're striders and they annihilate you. And otherwise, they're completely hapless. They are completely useless. Play this game in the hardest available difficulty, and guess what? The AI was garbage. The AI was so insanely bad at doing its job that most of the time, whenever there was a situation where there was like some sort of free-for-all where like the Combine were fighting zombies, or there was resistance fighters fighting some Combine, anything like that, they would inadvertently and inevitably kill themselves or do something really, really foolish. And I liken it to stuff like in Brood War. Most of my audience watches some of the Brood War content that I see. So when you see me testing a map, or you see me playing a map that somebody else made, and you see the AI do something retarded, and you hear me laugh at that, that's my immersion breaking right then and there. And the point is, in my content, I try my best to fix that, and I try my best to work around situations where the AI is going to be dumb. And I have aspirations to rework the AI system in Brood War entirely so that we can minimize even more of those and make them even more efficient and more lifelike, and eventually have aspirations to make my own RTS so that doesn't happen at all, because I can have full control over that shit, instead of having to rework existing systems like what I'm going to have to do with the help of some other people. We step away from that, and these developers who are getting paid professionally to do this are not taking any care in the world to make sure that their AI can be held accountable for holding up player immersion, because that is part of the responsibility of an AI to do, is to act out in your fucking game and to personify some sort of personality, some sort of character, some sort of goal. You know, it's a part of that being an AI is meant to be to simulate an actual entity living in a world. And you can't simulate a world and get immersed in a simulated world if your AI is breaking or spinning or doing nothing or doing stupid shit like running out in the open and getting gunned down like the degenerate dogs they are. You can't do any of that. You can't get immersed in a game that's like that. And the people who somehow did manage to get immersed, well, I have a feeling they played it when they were 12, by the way, as well, just like me. Additionally, I can't even feel like I can set all of that stuff aside and say, well, at least I have a fun game to play sometimes. Again, I have to say sometimes because sometimes it's a cutscene and sometimes it's a platforming puzzle section where I just smash. Because the balancing of the actual weapons and the way that the game is designed with its levels, it promotes corner camping, it promotes aiming down sights, which I didn't even do most of the time, but apparently you can tighten your zoom with a right mouse button and with some weapons. Notably not the SMG, but I guess like the pistol and stuff you can do that with. I didn't ever do that, and I have no interest in doing that right now. And you got to remember that doing all this stuff to make your aim more reliable or to steady your shot or to, you know, like when you're corner camping, like you see how bad this AI can be every single time you play like that, or every single time you play even remotely close to what is promoted by the level design and the game design of the weapons and the way that the enemies work and how much health they have and stuff. You actually see just how bad they are. Like when I was abusing the Strider AI and just spinning back and forth shooting them and stuff, and like, yeah, it took me a long time and I died a lot in those Strider sections, but you got to remember that like these areas are so fucking easy at the end of the day. Like the solution ends up being abusing how bad the AI is, or just progressing down until the fucking QuickTime event cutscene section activates and some stupid scripted event happens that would never happen ever again. And never happened before either, by the way. Like the Strider blowing out a building so that you could walk in a different area. Like, that's a cool movie scene, but it's not good for gameplay because you can't predict that. Because it's inconsistent. It doesn't happen all the time. If they did that free form, they were just destroying buildings left and right. Of course, it's probably not possible with the engine that they had at the time. But I'm just saying, if they actually did that, then that would be something that I could say, oh, that's a mechanic. That's how that AI works. I can take that and use that to my advantage. But I can't do that because it's a fucking scripted sequence. It's patooey. It's icky. Don't do that. And it brings us back to the idea that you're acting as a cameraman or an actor, I suppose, and you're showing a viewport for the story to be experienced through. Yeah. And I mean that's reinforced just by the fact that Gordon Freeman is a silent protagonist, a real dumbass. And I gotta say, like, I really dislike silent protagonists. I really dislike any situation where you're meant to role play your way into feeling like the character that's there. I think that's a very ancient way of, telling a story in a video game in the first place. I feel like it's so antiquated. I don't think it works in anything I've ever played. I've never felt like I relate to somebody who's a blank slate that's designed to make me relate to the situation more than I've related to an actual character who has dialogue, motivation, fucking backstory, some sort of consistency to them, some sort of drama. Nothing is established by, or accomplished rather, by having some sort of plot device character that moves the plot forward but is otherwise blank. And, until I see otherwise, until I see an example of something that actually is this and does work, I'm always going to maintain that it's not a good idea. I only have the counter example. I only have the example of shit that's gone wrong, like this game. So maybe somebody can enlighten me in the comments, but I mean, that's pretty much it, right? Like, that's the bulk of Half-Life 2 is you acting as a cameraman, you parading through scripted sequences, down linear corridors, down tight enclosed areas, vent simulator, fucking just charging through this, well, slogging through most of the time, but sometimes charging, sometimes slogging through a set-piece corridor. There's a couple of other points that I wanted to bring up, and again, going back to the more historical elements of the game, because now that we've really deconstructed what was so wrong about the title itself, I think we can talk a little bit about the precedents that Half-Life 2 set. I really don't like the way that it handled its adaptive difficulty. It's actually sort of a precursor to the stuff that they used in Left 4 Dead, where if you're not familiar with that game, they basically have some sort of automation or algorithmic detection of player supplies, what they need, and it spawns in certain enemies depending on how they've been performing, and certain consumables and pickups depending on what they are in need of. And I really feel like this is really, really bad. Like, imagine if you were playing some of the old games like Quake, and you're playing Quake, 1v1, and or team deathmatch or something, and you're out of health, and then the next power-up spawns and it's health, but normally it's ammo, or normally it's armor, or normally it's a laser rifle or something, like a fucking railgun rather. Obviously I don't play Quake very much because I'm talking about that, but you get the idea. It's like if it gives you one power-up when you need it, as opposed to always being consistent, like imagine what that would do. Imagine how that would skew things. And I really think it's much better if you know that some things are going to be consistent. Like maybe you can use some sort of zoom to scout ahead and see a crate, and that crate is colored a certain way or has a certain texture, and you know that crate has health, or you know that crate has ammo. Or you somehow have some other way to scout out information. It could just be some radar thing. Like we saw the caches that were hidden around in some of the scripted sequences towards the end in episode 2. And imagine if that was a consistent mechanic throughout the entire game, and all of a sudden now you got something on your hands. Now you got the idea that different caches with different contents are going to have different colors. Like maybe the lambda signal, or sigil rather, could show up as like partially green and partially red, and green is ammo and red is health. And you see like the more red it is, the more health it is, and the more green it is, the more ammo it is, and you can decide, do I want to stop for that? Do I need that? And if it's consistent every single time, and you have some sort of advanced warning because of your scouting, that would be much more useful. Now, again, this is a small example. Like, obviously, you would need some sort of permanent radar or something. That would need to be affixed to Gordon Freeman's suit or something like that if you were going to make that a consistent mechanic, because I really don't want to be in a fucking vehicle the whole game. But even that aside, that's really just something off the top of my head that I thought of as a potential solution to that. The bottom line is adaptive difficulty and giving the player what they need when they need it, instead of giving the player, supplies that are always consistent, or most, like, again, you see ammo and like there's a certain gun on it, right? Just like those crates that had infinite ammo, which is another really silly fucking thing that they did. Those crates with infinite ammo, you could put the same fucking logo on, the logo of the gun, on these other smaller crates that have ammo of other guns, and you could be like, all right, now I have this. And the other thing that I really think is weird is the fact that they limited your arsenal so much compared to other games. This is another thing that sort of went the same way that the rest of the games in the gaming world, in the gaming space, did. Like Halo 1 limits you to 2 guns and 4 grenades of each type, and that's really, really bad, I think. I don't really like that. But at least if you're going to do that, then maybe there's a chance that I actually have to use, multiple arsenals. Like, I have to pick up every weapon that I see could be viable for a certain situation. I've got to choose which weapon off of my dead enemies am I going to take, or my dead allies, potentially. But then they have, like, insanely high ammo capacities for most of their guns, especially the human ones. So it's even more silly. Like, in this case, you had very low ammo capacities, but you could have any of the weapons, although the weapon arsenal overall I thought was really bad and not nearly as exciting as other games. I understand, like, for a game that's trying to be a bit more narratively engaging, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to carry a bunch of weapons in you, and that's sort of like something that the player has to just not think about, otherwise it falls apart, because, like, how is he carrying all this shit? But with all the other liberties that the fucking story took, man, what a ridiculous experience. And I gotta also say, just a little bit more broad strokes discussion of a couple of things. It's sort of like a rapid fire situation here. I am going to talk a little bit about the characters and the voice acting. So the voice acting is really important, obviously. Everybody who plays fucking Brood War campaigns knows this, because none of the Brood War campaigns have them, and I have to do the voice acting myself. It's really fucking annoying when I'm trying to play a game, although most of the time I don't even get to do that in those particular playthroughs. But, if you know, you know. And when it comes to working with voice actors myself, and as a voice actor myself, I know the importance of voice acting, and the voice acting in this game is so off the walls. Most of the time it's terrible, most of the time it just doesn't fit, most of the time it's uninspired and boring, and the voice actors just sound like they did first takes, and the director said, yeah, okay, good. There's a couple of bright spots for Alex, but most of the time it's like in inopportune moments. Like, she sells the idea that she's trying to tell a joke or something, But the fucking the surrounding, like, what context, man? Like, read the room, like, figure out what the fuck just happened, and then try to tell me a joke after you see this horrifying thing that's a zombine, and she's like, oh, zombine, huh? Get it? And then she like uncomfortably chuckles. Like, the more they play up on the fact that that was cringe and out of place, the more frustrated I get, because the more cringe and out of place it ends up being. It's like shit like that just drives me up a wall, and drives Tony into it. That's a reference from the first game. See, I can make references too. Am I so funny or what? So yeah, there's just a certain amount of, I guess, like, gravity that you would expect to be held by certain situations, and they get diffused by her. And she does sound convincing when she's telling jokes, but it's not in a good way. It's like, yes, she sounds like she's very comfortable with her character. You know, that character sounds like they really do mean that joke, right? Like, it sounds immersive in that sense, but it's in service of a fucking joke at the expense of all the tension that they were trying to build and failing anyway. So the whole game was a joke in that respect, and she was not the one to tell it. You know, certain people can tell certain jokes. At least so I'm told. Anyways, that's pretty much the bulk of my sort of feedback for the game, my critique of the title. Again, like, I know so many people enjoy this type of game, not even just this game. Like, they enjoy the Metro games. They enjoy the games that, you know, fucking Duke Nukem Forever. They enjoy these games that are set piece driven, that have very enclosed, static areas, AI that are busted, level design that promotes corner camping and slowly peeking into rooms, and Warcraft 3 luring everybody out of the fucking area that they're in to kill them, and all this other junk that just is so boring and so uninspired when it comes to actually playing the game, let alone making one. They're into that. They enjoy that, and they get immersed in that, and I don't understand that at all. And I don't mean to sound like I'm talking down to those people. I literally just cannot understand where they're coming from. Maybe they'll have their lives ruined. They'll never be able to enjoy their favorite cuck FPS again because of this review, because they've seen the light. But less ironically and less silly, it is my request for actual information. So again, just like I said at the end of the Half-Life 1 review, if you actually disagree with me on any of these points, or you would like to elaborate why you like the game or anything like that, I am all ears. And I am still interested in doing the video content that I mentioned I'm going to do in the Half-Life 1 review. I did want to play Half-Life 2 before I actually get to that, and of course I am very busy with some other stuff right now, so who knows when I will get started on those, hopefully December, maybe next year. But ultimately, what I really want to do is I want to find some well-respected reviews or analyses of the Half-Life franchise, of Half-Life 1, of Half-Life 2, some in-depth stuff, and I want to basically make a video response to it. And I know it's kind of like, why don't you just make your own video? But the point is that that's kind of what this is this me ranting about how the game is bad and I don't understand why people like it. And then me doing those video responses is an attempt to understand why people like it, while also arguing better, sort of well, hopefully a better argued approach, but just in general a better position, in my opinion. Trying to figure out like how to communicate with these people without most people just shut down. You know, they just say, oh, you don't like my favorite game and you think it's bad? Well, fuck you, you're an asshole. And that's usually the reaction I get. So of course I don't engage those people anyway, but if you are still in disagreement with me and you actually do feel like commenting, please do. I would like to hear what you have to say. And if you know any reviews or you know any video essays or anything that people have done of the sort that argue well for the game, in your opinion, link them, please. Let me know. And otherwise, I will be going on my own hunt for those, and we'll figure out what we can do there. And that's that, man. That's all I have to say about Half-Life 2. Nice and short, by my standards anyways, under half an hour. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the playthrough. It was really dumb, and it wasn't nearly as funny as it really should have been to make up for the fact that it was not engaging whatsoever. And our next voyage into FPS games is going to be some older stuff. We might do CNC Renegade next immediately. Not immediately, but like after some of the other Command & Conquer games. But if not that, then we'll just do like the Doom stuff and all the other classics. So, see you then. See you around. Mwah. Kisses. Bye.